Have you ever lived in a house that remembers? Not just creaking floors or moaning pipes, but a house that listens. One that waits. One that echoes back memories you never lived, in voices not your own. In the quiet town of Elmridge, nestled among fog-shrouded hills, there stands a house no one speaks of openly. The shutters always seem slightly ajar. Its chimney never breathes smoke. And those who've lived there, well, few have stayed long enough to tell the tale. But this story isn't about them. It's about a young couple who dared to believe they'd found their dream home on Barrow Lane. A sprawling Victorian fixer-upper, too cheap to be true. They heard the rumors. They ignored the warnings. And once they climbed into the attic, they were never alone again. Because some houses don't forget. And some echoes never fade. The house had been on the market for over 17 months. It loomed at the end of Barrow Lane like a forgotten book. Its paint peeling, its eaves rotting, and its roofline slightly sagging under the weight of years. Still, when Hannah and Mark Whitmore pulled up that overcast April morning, it felt right. Or at least it looked like it could be. A place to start over. The realtor, an overly cheery woman named Maureen, fumbled with the lock on the rusted gate. "You'll have to forgive the state of the yard," she said. "No one's lived here since the Hendleys." Mark raised an eyebrow. Who were they? Oh, just the previous owners. She avoided his gaze. Inside, the house was exactly what Hannah had hoped. A time capsule. A grand staircase with carved banisters curled upward like a question mark. Tall windows lined the hallway, their glass stained amber with grime. The air was dry, but not unpleasant. Old, yes, but not dead. Still, as they walked room to room, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that the house was listening. When he paused on the threshold of a narrow hallway, he heard something faint, almost like tick. "Did you hear that?" he asked. Hannah looked up from the kitchen doorway. "Hear what?" Mark waited, holding his breath. Tick, tick. It was slow, deliberate, like the tick of a grandfather clock, but off rhythm, organic, wrong. "Could be pipes," Maureen offered. "The heating's ancient, but it wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from above." They all glanced upward at the same time. The ceiling creaked as if reacting. "There's an attic," Maureen said quickly. "It's sealed for now. Probably just squirrels. But we can take a look once inspections are done." The sale closed faster than expected. For only $129,000, they became the owners of the oldest house on Barrow Lane. Hannah joked about starting a blog, From Rot to Revival, Our Victorian Resurrection. Mark focused on sanding floors, stripping wallpaper, and ignoring the strange chills that ran through the hall at night. It wasn't just the cold. It was directional, like someone breathing across his neck. They found the attic hatch by accident. It was in the upstairs hallway ceiling, concealed behind a large, nailed-up vent cover. Hannah spotted it while painting the trim. "Why cover an attic entrance?" she asked, frowning. Mark stood on a step stool, prying at the wood. Maybe insulation issues. But the cover wasn't screwed in, it was nailed. 12 thick, rusted nails driven in with precision. Mark had to go get a crowbar. The nails pulled free with a dry shriek of wood and iron. A puff of dust burst into the air, followed by something that smelled faintly like dry roses and wet stone. He pulled the hatch open. Above, darkness. The kind that felt like it had mass. They stared for a long moment. The smell grew stronger, like soil and perfume and something older. Mark broke the silence. "I'll check it out later. Probably just storage." But he didn't. That night, the ticking returned. Louder now. Tick, tick. Mark sat upright in bed at 3:03 a.m., eyes wide. The sound was coming from the hallway again, but slower this time. It didn't echo like a clock. It sounded like footsteps, but not on the floor. On rafters. Above them. He crept into the hall in boxers and bare feet, a flashlight in one hand. The beam trembled slightly as he aimed it toward the ceiling. The attic hatch was still open, just slightly ajar. A few inches of black stared back at him like an eye. "Hannah," he whispered. No answer. He climbed onto the stool and pushed the hatch up. Silence. The flashlight's beam pierced the dust, revealing ancient wood, support beams, boxes, and a small rocking horse. It sat alone in the far corner, tilted forward like it had just finished rocking. Mark blinked. The beam faltered. When he pointed the light again, the horse was still. But the air felt occupied. Something else was up there with him. Back in bed, he told himself it was stress. House stress. Renovation stress. Big move. New job. All normal. Still, he dreamt of the attic that night. Except in the dream, the attic was much larger. Endless. And there were voices, whispers, coming from inside the walls. They were calling his name. The next morning, Hannah found Mark staring at the attic door again. "You didn't go up, did you?" she asked, setting coffee down beside him. "No," he lied. She hesitated. "I heard something last night." He looked at her. "Like what?" She hesitated. "A voice. Maybe. A child's voice." "What did it say?" She didn't answer, just looked up at the attic hatch. "Maybe we should seal it again," she said finally. Mark nodded slowly. Neither of them moved. The attic door stayed open. Mark told himself he would get to it tomorrow. But tomorrow kept slipping away. Something about that opening, that dark square above the hallway, made him feel like a trespasser in his own home. Even in broad daylight. He bought a set of heavy-duty screws and a padlock from the hardware store, but the tools sat untouched on the kitchen counter. He couldn't bring himself to climb up again. Not since the night of the rocking horse. But Hannah was growing more uneasy by the day. It started with the humming. She'd be in the shower, rinsing out shampoo, and hear it, soft, tuneless, childlike. A few drawn-out notes, drifting from the hallway. Once, she whipped the curtain open mid-rinse, certain someone was standing outside the door. There was no one. Then came the scratching. In the walls, in the floorboards, behind the bathroom mirror. "Rodents," Mark said, not meeting her eyes. "It's an old house." But she saw the corners of his mouth tighten. He didn't believe it either. The tension built quietly. Hannah began leaving lights on. Hall lights, closet lights, even the small lamp by the attic hatch. She stopped closing doors completely, just in case she needed to see out fast. Mark caught her one night whispering to herself in the kitchen, though she swore she'd just been singing. But there was no melody in what she said. On a rainy Tuesday, the storm knocked the power out for 3 hours. The outage blanketed the house in wet, heavy silence.
No free llum. No street lamps.
Just the patter of rain and the occasional creak from overhead. They sat on the living room floor with flashlights and a cold dinner of crackers and cheese. The flashlight beam landed on an old family photo hung sideways near the stairs. Hannah tilted her head. Was that always crooked? Mark got up and straightened it, only to pause. Behind the frame, he noticed an outline on the wall. A faint square of different colored paint. What the hell? He lifted the frame and gasped. There was something carved into the plaster beneath. Faint, like it had been painted over long ago. A name. Eliza. And beneath that, a small etched drawing. A child's stick figure. Smiling. Arms outstretched. Behind it, what looked like the outline of a ladder. Or rafters. They sat in silence, flashlight beam flickering. Hannah finally asked, "Do you think she's from the attic?" Mark didn't answer. He didn't want to. That night, the dream returned. Mark stood at the foot of the attic stairs. Not the real ones, but an exaggerated, rotting version that stretched endlessly upward into shadow. With each step he took, the air grew colder. The walls moaned softly, and far above him something rocked slowly back and forth. Not a horse this time, a cradle. Inside, Swaddled in age-yellowed linen, lay a child. Its face was obscured, but it breathed. Its lips moved as though whispering. Mark leaned closer. Suddenly, the cradle snapped shut like a bear trap. The child screamed, not in pain but in laughter. Shrill, endless, echoing. He woke choking on air. The clock read 3:03 a.m. He found Hannah downstairs, already awake, sitting cross-legged in the laundry room with her back to the dryer. When he spoke, she flinched so violently that the flashlight clattered from her hands. "Sorry," he said, helping her up. "I couldn't sleep." She hesitated. "I had a dream." He stopped. They looked at each other for a long, silent moment. "Was it the attic?" he asked. She nodded. "There was a girl. She told me her name was Eliza. She said the attic was hers. That she was still waiting." "For what?" Hannah swallowed. "For us to hear her story." The next morning, Hannah opened the attic. She didn't tell Mark first. She waited until he went to the hardware store for paint and screws, then climbed up with a lantern and notebook. Mark came home to find the house deathly still. No music, no water running, just open silence, and the attic hatch yawning wide. He called her name once, twice. No answer. Panic lanced through his chest as he grabbed the stepladder and hauled himself upward into the void. The attic was colder than before, almost icy. Dust coated every surface, but there were no signs of rodents, no droppings, no nests, just old things. Wooden trunks, moth-eaten curtains, faded furniture, and in the farthest corner, Hannah. She sat cross-legged on the floor in front of an old, cracked vanity. Its mirror was shattered, but one jagged piece still clung to the frame like a silver tooth. She held a small object in her hands, a ribbon, pale blue, frayed at the ends. She turned it over and over with a blank expression. Mark stepped forward, crunching glass underfoot. "Hannah!" She turned slowly. Her face was pale, eyes wide, but not frightened, entranced. "She tied it around her wrist," she whispered, "when they locked her up here. She thought if she kept it tight enough, she wouldn't disappear." Mark crouched beside her. "Who?" "Eliza." She nodded. "She's not angry. Not yet. She's just cold. And alone. She doesn't remember how long it's been." Mark looked at the cracked mirror. For just a moment, a second reflection shimmered into view beside them. A small girl. Gray dress. Braided hair. Hollow eyes. Smiling. Then she was gone. Mark didn't scream. He didn't move. He simply stared at the broken shard of mirror where the girl had been. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, the attic was a vacuum. No sound, no air, no sense of time. Then Hannah stood. "She showed me where to look," she said softly, brushing dust off her jeans. "There's something behind the vanity." Mark tried to protest, but the words dried on his tongue. Hannah pressed her fingers along the back of the warped furniture, searching for a latch or gap. The old wood groaned in protest as she nudged it aside, revealing a narrow panel in the wall. A cut in the boards, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. Together they knelt down. The panel wasn't nailed or screwed. Slid open like a drawer, slow and stiff. Inside was a small space no larger than a cupboard, but what it held made Mark recoil. Porcelain doll. Cracked, with one eye missing. A child's shoe, dried with something dark at the toe. And a bundle of paper. Yellowed, brittle, tied with what looked like a human braid. They didn't speak. Hannah reached into the space with trembling hands and gently pulled the papers free. The braid fell away like dead ivy. She unwrapped the bundle carefully, revealing a set of pages, handwritten in looping cursive. The ink had faded but was still legible. The top page bore a name in crimson ink. Eliza Greaves, Winter, 1902. Underneath, in smaller writing, "They don't believe me, but the attic listens. It always listens." They brought the journal downstairs, where light from the kitchen window seemed to ease the tightness in their chests. Over mugs of untouched coffee, Hannah read the first few pages aloud. Mother says I lie. Father says I invent things to get attention. But the girl behind the mirror told me her name too. She said she used to live here long before me. She says the attic has always been hungry. It doesn't eat food. It eats people's time, their voice, their memory. That's why I write. So it can't take mine. Mark looked up. She wasn't talking about a ghost. Hannah nodded. She was talking about the house. That night neither of them slept. They lay in bed, eyes on the ceiling, counting each creak. At exactly 3:03 a.m., a soft tap came from the hallway. Then another. Then the slow creak of something shifting above them. Mark reached for the bat he now kept beside the bed. Hannah clutched the journal to her chest like a child with a blanket. Neither moved. The tapping stopped after a minute, but the silence that followed felt even worse. Over the next few days, things escalated. Hannah became increasingly fixated on the journal. She read it obsessively, whispering the lines under her breath, sometimes even scribbling her own thoughts into the margins. She began referring to Eliza as though she were still alive. She was locked in the attic by her parents, she explained to Mark over dinner. They said she was hysterical, that she'd gone mad after her baby brother died. But she didn't hurt him. How do you know that? Mark asked gently. Because she told me, Hannah said, eyes wide. She told me it was the attic that did it, that it needed someone. She just heard it too late. Mark tried to distract her, offered to take a weekend trip, even suggested calling a priest. But Hannah refused. She said they couldn't leave yet. Eliza wants us to understand what happened. All of it. Mark stared at the attic hatch, now permanently ajar like an open mouth. I think we already understand too much. The real breaking point came when Hannah stopped eating. She would sit at the table, food untouched, lips moving silently as she traced her finger over the journal's pages. Her eyes grew sunken, skin pale. One night, Mark woke to find her standing beneath the attic hatch again, just staring. When he touched her shoulder, she flinched violently. He's coming, she whispered. Who? Her lips trembled. Eliza called him the one who echoes. She said once he starts repeating your voice, you're his. Mark backed away slowly. Hannah, listen to me. You need rest. But she only smiled faintly. He already spoke to me. That day, Mark locked the attic. He climbed up, slammed the hatch and screwed it shut from the hallway side. Then he bolted it with 2 padlocks. The sound of metal on wood was cathartic, like sealing a tomb. But that night, at 3:03 a.m., the sound returned. Only this time it wasn't a tick. It was a voice, and it was his voice, calling from the attic. Hannah? Come here. I need help. He sat upright in bed, heart hammering. Hannah stirred beside him, confused. The voice called again, softer, desperate. Hannah, please. It's me, Mark.
I'm trapped.
Mark leapt out of bed, grabbed the bat, and ran into the hallway. The hatch was still bolted, still shut, but his voice was still calling from inside. Hannah! He locked me in. He's not me. Mark stood beneath the attic hatch, his breath visible in the hallway's unnatural chill. The voice, his voice, continued pleading softly from the other side of the wooden door. Hannah, you have to let me out. Please. He's lying to you. Hannah appeared behind him in the dark, barefoot and pale. Her eyes locked on the attic hatch like it was alive. That's not your voice, she whispered. Mark turned. It sounds like me. But it isn't, she said, her hand tightening around the banister. Eliza warned me. The attic steals voices before it takes the rest. They stood in silence, the echo still murmuring just above their heads. He isn't me. I'm the one who loves you. Hannah's eyes welled with tears. Mark grabbed her hand. Don't listen. It's trying to divide us. It already has, she whispered. The next morning, Mark unscrewed the attic bolts. He did it carefully, bracing for something to reach out. But when the hatch fell open with a soft creak, the attic revealed only darkness. The smell hit him instantly, rancid, wet wood and wilted flowers. Like a long-sealed coffin opened too late. He climbed up slowly, flashlight in hand. Everything appeared exactly the same. The same rocking horse, the cracked vanity, the brittle air, until he noticed the new set of footprints in the dust. Small,
Bare.
child-sized, they led across the attic floor toward the corner wall, then vanished. No return prints, no sign of someone stepping back, just gone. Downstairs, Hannah had taken to muttering to herself, carrying the journal wherever she went like a sacred relic. She barely responded to Mark's voice anymore. When she did look at him, it was with the caution of someone speaking to a stranger. He found her once standing in the kitchen whispering to the oven door, as though something inside might whisper back. That same day, she removed all the mirrors from the house. "I saw her again," she said. "Eliza." Hannah shook her head.
No.
Someone else. Someone Eliza warned about. The one who doesn't echo, he records. Mark's blood ran cold. "What does that mean?" "He copies you," she said. "He replaces you." That night, Mark set up a camera aimed at the attic hatch. He had to know if something was really coming out at 3:03 a.m. He didn't tell Hannah. She was already slipping, and he didn't want to scare her more than she already was. He stayed up, watching the feed from his phone in the dark. 3:00, 3:01. Silence. At exactly 3:03, the camera glitched. Not a fade, not a skip. A jerk, as though someone physically jostled the feed. The image twisted for a split second before returning to normal. But when it came back, the hatch was open. Just slightly. He hadn't heard it, hadn't seen it move. He rushed into the hallway, phone in hand. The hatch was shut, padlocked, screwed, exactly as he'd left it. But when he looked at the camera feed again, the timestamp was gone, replaced by a blinking red dot and a label he had not written. Recording, subject 2. He deleted the footage. The next morning, Hannah was gone. Not gone from the house. Gone. No note. No phone. No signs of forced entry. Her shoes were by the door, untouched. But the attic hatch was open again. Wider this time. Mark didn't wait. He called the police, who searched the house and found nothing unusual. No signs of entry. No damage. No hidden doors, though they humored him and tapped the walls. They even entered the attic, 2 officers and a forensics tech. They found nothing. No blood.
No fingerprints. No Hannah.
They left after 4 hours with polite frowns and "will follow up." Mark stood alone in the living room, listening to the walls groan softly in the silence. That night, he opened the journal. He hadn't read much of it before, just the first page or two. Now he flipped through frantically, looking for something, anything. And there it was near the end. He takes one at a time. That's how he stays hidden. If you see yourself, run. If you hear yourself, pray. If you speak to yourself, it's already too late. At 3:03 a.m., the lights flickered on their own. Mark hadn't touched them. He sat up in bed, heart pounding, bat in hand. Then came the voice. "Mark." It was Hannah. She was calling from the attic. "Please, help me. I'm stuck." Mark froze. He wanted to believe it, needed to, but something in the voice was off. Like the rhythm was just a beat too slow, the syllables too even. Then she said it again. "I'm stuck. I'm stuck. I'm stuck." Same inflection, same pitch, same exact pause. Looping. A recording. He dropped the bat and ran outside into the cold, barefoot, shivering. From the yard, he looked up at the attic window. And in the pale blue light of the moon, he saw her. Not Hannah. Something wearing her face. It watched him, unmoving, then smiled just slightly, like someone trying to remember how to smile. And behind it, in the window's reflection, stood himself. Mark didn't go back inside that night. He sat in his car, engine off, keys clutched in a fist slick with sweat. He watched the attic window as the hours dragged by, praying the thing that looked like him wouldn't come down the stairs. It never did. But it didn't leave either. It just stood in the window, watching. By sunrise, the shape had vanished. Mark forced himself back into the house. He moved slowly, every floorboard creak sending electric fear up his spine. The air was thick now, wrong somehow, as if the house exhaled with each of his steps. Every light was off. Every mirror was gone. Every clock read 3:03 a.m. Even though it was 6:27 in the morning. He checked his phone. The time was right there. Verified. The clocks were lying. He packed a duffel bag with a few clothes and Hannah's journal, then headed for the door. But as he reached for the handle, he heard a click from behind. The attic hatch was open again. He hadn't touched it. He hadn't even been upstairs. But there it was, hanging down like a yawning mouth, and something scraped softly above. A dragging sound. Slow. Bit. Deliberate. He wanted to run. He should have run. But Hannah's voice echoed in his head. She wants us to understand what happened. All of it. He turned, swallowing hard, and climbed the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last. The boy's name was Owen, 3 years old. Bright eyes, quiet laugh. Since the move to Barrow Lane, he'd become different. He no longer responded to his name the first time. He no longer reached for his toys. He would simply sit, often cross-legged in the upstairs hallway, facing the attic hatch with his hands folded in his lap like he was waiting for something to begin. His parents chalked it up to the stress of the move. The pediatrician said it was a developmental plateau. The mother, Layla, wasn't so sure, because one night, when she passed him on the landing just past midnight, he whispered something that made her blood go cold. She's still in the walls. She never left. Layla stopped. Who? Owen didn't look away from the hatch. The girl with the braid. The voice was soft and flat, not playful, not curious, just informative, the way a child might recite the alphabet. The next morning, Layla found something strange in Owen's room. A drawing taped to the window. He wasn't allowed tape or markers, but there it was, a simple stick figure with long hair drawn in brown crayon. Behind the figure were crooked lines that looked like beams or bars, and in the corner, small, cramped letters written in a different hand. Let me out. Layla stared at the page, her skin crawling. Owen? She called gently. He didn't answer. He was sitting beneath his bed, knees to chest, rocking slightly, humming. When she crouched down and asked what he was singing, he looked up and said, perfectly calm, the song the attic sings. Her husband, Marcus, didn't believe her at first. It's just adjustment stuff, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. Kids act weird all the time. Remember when he wouldn't walk on tile floors for 2 weeks? Layla wanted to believe that, but tile floors never made him speak in voices that weren't his own. She started recording him at night, not just to monitor his sleep, but to catch what she was beginning to fear was communication. And within 3 nights, she had what she needed. At exactly 3:03 a.m., Owen sat up in bed, suddenly, sharply, and stared directly into the baby monitor camera. Then he spoke. Why did you close the hatch? It's lonely. He's almost ready now. Layla dropped her phone. She called Marcus home from work. They opened the attic together. The hatch came free with a sharp creak. Inside, the dust was heavier than before. Layers of it covered the wooden floor like snow, broken only by a single path of small footprints leading from the hatch to the far wall, and then stopping. In the dust near the rocking horse, Marcus spotted something glinting. It was a key, old, brass, curved like a question mark. He picked it up carefully. On the tag, the word journal was etched. Layla stared. What does that mean? Marcus turned it over in his palm. Maybe something up here is locked? But everything in the attic was either broken or already open, until Layla spotted the box. A wooden chest, about the size of a microwave, tucked behind the cracked vanity and a stack of moth-eaten linen. It had no latch, just a keyhole shaped to match the one Marcus held. He inserted it, turned. The box clicked open. Inside was a red leather journal, dusty but intact, bound in leather and tied with a frayed blue ribbon. On the first page, in neat cursive, property of Eliza Greaves. Do not read. He watches what I write. Layla looked at Marcus. Who is Eliza? Marcus shook his head, but Owen answered from behind them. She's the one who stayed too long. Layla spun at the sound of Owen's voice. He stood just beneath the attic hatch, head tilted, one hand resting lightly on the frame. His face was blank, his tone too steady, unnatural for a child barely out of toddlerhood. Who told you about Eliza? She asked. Owen blinked slowly. She did. You mean, in a dream? He shook his head. In the walls. When I listen really hard. Marcus moved toward him, placing a hand on his shoulder. Owen, buddy, you shouldn't be up here. It's not safe. Owen didn't respond. He walked past them, directly to the box, and touched the journal with the soft reverence of a priest laying hands on a sacred text. I think she wrote about the echo, he said. Layla crouched beside him. What echo? Owen's gaze didn't shift. The one that gets louder the more you talk to it. It copies you until there's nothing left. They brought the journal downstairs. Layla flipped carefully through the delicate, time-worn pages. Some entries were missing, torn out violently, leaving ragged edges. Others were smeared with fingerprints or what looked like soot. Each entry read like a dissent. A girl, age unknown, slowly realizing the house wasn't just haunted. It was parasitic. He speaks through things. He doesn't have a mouth. Just mirrors and walls and cracks between the floorboards. He watches while you sleep. But he always starts in the attic. That's where he was born, I think. I heard my voice last night. It said things I don't remember thinking. I'm scared to answer. What if I am the echo now? I made the mistake of speaking to it. Now I hear it when I look in mirrors. I don't know how, but I hear it. Layla stopped on a page marked with an X at the corner. It had only one line, written in what looked like a shaking hand. If you hear your child speak back to you in your own voice, run. She set the book down slowly. Marcus had gone quiet. He was staring at Owen, who was now seated at the bottom of the stairs, humming to himself again. The same tune from the monitor. Low, off key, repeating. That evening, Layla tucked Owen into bed early. She didn't say why. She didn't need to. The boy didn't protest. He smiled softly as if he already knew. Afterward, Layla searched the house for anything that could reflect, just in case. Picture frames, the surface of the microwave, even the shiny metal of the toaster. All were covered or removed. The mirrors, of course, had already been packed away after their first week in the house. But one remained, the ornate one in the guest bedroom closet. It had been too heavy to move, too nailed in to remove. She'd forgotten it was even there, until she opened the door. It wasn't her reflection. The thing in the mirror wore her face, but stood wrong. The shoulders were too low. The smile was practiced, over tight, and the eyes were marks. She gasped and slammed the door shut, then pounded nails across the frame, covered it in an old quilt, shoved the dresser in front of it. When she turned, Owen was in the hallway, watching. I told you, he said calmly. He learns slow, but when he learns, he remembers forever. Layla and Marcus stayed up that night reading more of the journal. They pored over Eliza's descent into terror. In one entry, dated February 1st, 1902, Eliza wrote, I saw Father again today. He said I'd been locked up long enough. He kissed my forehead. But he wasn't warm. And when I looked into his eyes, I saw a girl inside screaming. I think he was just wearing him. Another page later, he told me he can't leave the attic until someone speaks to him willingly. Then he grows. Then he can echo them. I think that's why I'm still here. I said, hello. And finally, I'm forgetting how I used to sound. I think he's learning me too well. I'm scared that when they open the door again, it won't be me walking out. Marcus slammed the book shut. We need to leave. Layla nodded. Tonight. But they didn't have time. At 3:03 a.m., every light in the house flickered and died. The hallway filled with a soft, wet ticking sound, like a clock submerged in something thick. Marcus reached for the flashlight, but the batteries had drained. Layla grabbed Owen and held him tight, whispering into his ear, I love you. I love you. You're my boy, not his. But Owen stared past her shoulder, smiling, as if something behind her was waving hello. Layla didn't want to look behind her. She knew the rules now. Don't speak to it. Don't turn around. Don't acknowledge it's there. But the air changed. The room got warmer, not with heat, but with breath. A slow, invisible exhale, as if something enormous had been holding itself still for hours, and finally sighed. She clenched Owen tighter. Marcus whispered, We have to move. But the hallway stretched longer than before. It should have taken 5 seconds to cross. 10, maybe, but now the end seemed farther, like the house itself had expanded under cover of darkness. They took one step forward, then another. The ticking stopped, and in that silence, the voice returned. A little girl's whisper, riding the dust in the air like static. She hears me now. She's listening. She said hello. Layla's knees buckled. She hadn't said anything aloud. Not since the light flickered out. She hadn't spoken, but her mind had. She had thought the word, hello. They reached the front door. Marcus turned the deadbolt. Pulled. Nothing. It didn't budge. He twisted harder, gritting his teeth. The knob jerked, but the frame held fast, as though the wood itself had grown together. Back door, Layla said through gritted teeth. But as they turned, Owen reached toward the living room. There's someone in the kitchen, he said. They froze. Marcus stepped toward the archway, heart hammering in his chest, and peeked around the corner. No one. Then the refrigerator light blinked on, and reflected in the metal finish, warped but unmistakable, was his own face. Smiling, wider than he ever had. The face blinked once, out of sync, then vanished. The light shut off. The room fell back into shadow. They didn't stop to check again. They ran, past the stairs, down the hallway, into the mudroom. Layla twisted the handle of the back door, locked. Not jammed, just locked. She hadn't locked it. She never locked it. Marcus stepped up with the key, inserted it, turned, snap. The key broke off in the lock. The handle jiggled once, then twice, then began turning on its own. Layla screamed and backed away, clutching Owen to her chest. Marcus grabbed a chair and wedged it under the doorknob. The handle stilled. Silence returned. Layla was breathing hard, Owen quiet in her arms. Marcus held the journal like a shield. Then 3 soft knocks from above. The ceiling. From the attic. Knock, knock, knock. And then a new voice, crisp and clear. Layla's own voice. It's me. Let me in. She gasped. Owen looked up at her and whispered, You shouldn't talk to her. She's not you anymore. They huddled in the hallway, backs against the wall, watching as the shadows deepened in the corners of the house. Marcus flipped through the journal again, searching for some instruction, some escape clause, anything they'd missed. Then he stopped on a page that hadn't been there before. A new one. The paper was cleaner, the ink wetter. Layla leaned in to read over his shoulder. If you want to survive, don't run. Don't fight. Just ask one question. Ask, who was the first? Marcus looked at Layla. What does that mean? Before she could answer, the attic door creaked. Not swung open, just nudged. Softly, like an invitation. The hallway dimmed as if something drew the light upward. And Owen stepped forward. Toward the stairs. Toward the sound. Layla lunged.
No.
But his feet kept moving. His eyes fixed on the hatch. I want to ask her, he whispered. I want to know who the first was. Layla clutched his hand. We'll ask. Together. And they began to climb. At the top of the stairs, they paused beneath the attic hatch. The air above pulsed gently. Owen looked up. She's close now. Layla held his hand tighter and whispered the question. Who was the first? For a moment, there was nothing. Then a sound like wind through bone filled the attic. And a voice, male, ancient, low and cavernous, answered. The one who spoke to the silence. The one who named me. The one who let me be heard. A pause. Then, she wrote the first echo. The journal in Marcus's hand twitched. Then pulsed once. The ribbon unfurled like a slow breath. And a page that had never existed before opened. A name, written in soot-black ink. Margaret Greaves, 1873. Layla's hands trembled. She wasn't the first owner, Marcus said, voice shaking. She was the mother. Owen nodded solemnly. Eliza didn't create him. She inherited him. Layla stared at the name inked on the page like a wound. Margaret Greaves, 1873. She was the first to speak, Marcus murmured. The first to, what? Invited in. No, Owen said softly. His voice far too measured for a child. She didn't invite it. She answered it. They descended from the attic without climbing inside. The house no longer resisted their steps, it allowed them down. Allowed them to breathe. Allowed them to walk the hallway back into the living room, where the air felt a fraction less suffocating than it had moments before. But Layla didn't mistake it for safety. The house was watching, letting them continue because it was curious. Because now they were asking the right questions. They returned to the journal. The next entry appeared as if summoned. I found her name in the floorboards beneath the cradle. Mother Margaret. She said words the house liked. Words it wanted to keep hearing. When she died, it went silent. For years. Until I was born. And then, it remembered. I think it lives in language. That's why it echoes. That's why it mimics. The attic is a mouth, and we are its breath. Layla stood, her hands trembling. We have to leave. We have to go. Marcus didn't argue. He had already started packing what little they could carry. Essentials. Documents. The journal. They didn't speak much, afraid that even casual conversation would fuel it. But Owen sang. Soft lullabies. Outdated nursery rhymes they'd never taught him. At first Layla thought he was humming. Then she listened closer. Sleep, child, sleep. The attic will keep. Secrets in timber. Blood in the beams. Close both eyes and drown your dreams. She froze. Owen, where did you learn that? He looked up with calm, empty eyes. She sings it in the mirror. They drove through the night. Didn't stop for gas until 3 towns over. Didn't eat. Didn't talk. Just silence. But silence didn't help. The radio, even turned off, flickered on at 3:03 a.m., hissing static through the speakers. From the rearview mirror, Layla saw her own reflection flicker. Only for a moment. Only long enough for her to know it wasn't hers. The next day, in a small motel room, Layla flipped back through the journal, trying to find any reference to how Margaret Greaves first contacted the presence. Most entries were too fragmented, burned, smudged, or missing entirely. Until Owen walked to the corner of the room and began scratching the wallpaper with his fingernail. Marcus tried to stop him, but behind the paper was a panel. And behind the panel was a page. Folded neatly, wrapped in waxed cloth, untouched by time. Layla unwrapped it with shaking hands. It was brittle, browned at the edges, but readable. A letter. To whoever finds this, I am Margaret Greaves. I write this not for salvation, but for warning. In 1871, I heard a sound in the walls. It was not a rat. It was not a voice. It was a reply. I asked nothing. I said only a single word aloud. Who? And something answered. Layla looked up. She didn't summon it. She named it. Marcus finished reading the letter aloud. He has no body. He takes the shape of our sounds, our words. He eats identity through repetition. And once he has learned your voice, he can ask questions in it. That's when it begins. When you start answering yourself. I tried to bind him to the attic, the highest point of the house, furthest from the ground, closest to what came before. But I do not think it will hold forever. If you read this, leave. Leave your house. Leave your name. Never answer a question in your own voice. And never say hello to silence. The last line was smeared. Owen traced it with his finger. She tried to starve it, he said. Layla pulled him close. Marcus asked quietly, so how do we finish what she started? Owen looked up at both of them and whispered, we have to teach it to forget. Teach it to forget? Marcus echoed, confused. How do you teach something like that to forget? Owen stood in the middle of the motel room, as still as a statue. He looked smaller than ever, lost in oversized pajamas, silhouetted by the yellowed light of the bathroom behind him. You stop answering it, he said. You starve it of what it eats. Which is, our words, Layla realized. Owen nodded. But not just words. Recognition. It listens to hear itself in you. That's how it gets stronger. The silence that followed was immense. Layla thought back. Every time someone had responded to the voice, every time someone believed it was real, acknowledged it, that's when the house changed. That's when it advanced. Eliza hadn't been mad. Mark Whitmore hadn't been paranoid. They'd fed it. And now Owen was next. Marcus was already writing in his notebook. Okay, so no names, no voices, no answers. But what about intention? Thought? If Layla thought the word, hello, and it responded, we have to erase ourselves from it, Layla said slowly. Break the mirror it uses to copy. But how? Owen walked to the journal again and opened it. Not to a written page, but one that was blank. He placed his palm against it. Nothing happened. Then, slowly, a faint black print, his handprint, bled through the surface. Marcus stepped back. Jesus. Owen didn't flinch. Words began appearing beneath the print in fine, shaky cursive. He knows the names. All of them. That's how he climbs through you. Through your mouth. Through your reflection. Through your breath. He echoes names first. Then questions. Then commands. To break the echo, speak only what is not yours. Give him words that do not belong. Foreign songs. Dead languages. Things never spoken before. Make him forget what a person sounds like. Layla stared at the words as they faded into the page like water evaporating. I don't know ancient languages, she said. I barely passed Spanish in high school. Then we invent one, Owen replied. They stayed up all night.
No electronics. No reflections.
Every mirror covered. Every phone screen blackened. Owen hummed, occasionally correcting his parents as they scribbled strings of nonsense syllables across napkins and receipts. No, that one's too close to hello. That one sounds like hungry. He'll understand that. Layla didn't ask how he knew. She was past the point of questioning. By dawn, they had constructed a patchwork vocabulary. Guttural consonants, clicking vowels, sharp, chaotic inflections. Layla practiced, repeating meaningless sentences while staring into the mirror she had uncovered. She didn't flinch when her reflection didn't match her lips. Didn't blink when the reflection smiled late. Didn't scream when it began speaking back. in her voice. Instead, she spoke their nonsense language. Made up words with no root, no memory. Words without soul. And the reflection paused, tilted its head, confused, then blinked once, twice, then vanished. Owen said it softly, "You're unlearning him." They drove home at dusk. Not because they wanted to, because they had to. This wasn't just about survival now. It was about breaking the cycle, destroying the chain. As they turned onto Barrow Lane, the sky overhead seemed darker than it should have been. The house waited at the end, all lights off, windows black. But Layla noticed something new. A crack in the attic window. Hairline. Small. Like pressure had built from the inside out. Like something trapped had finally tried to push. They entered with only one flashlight between them. No speaking. Just nods. Gestures. They moved through the house, dropping symbols drawn in their new, nonsense language. Chalk on walls.
Etchings in door frames.
A new syntax to replace the haunted blueprint of English. When they reached the attic, they didn't climb up. Instead, they stood beneath it and spoke in their broken, made-up dialect. Repeated phrases over and over. Words that meant nothing. Words that couldn't be remembered, couldn't be echoed. Layla felt it first. A subtle tremor through the wood. Then a pressure in her chest. Owen whispered in their fake tongue. Zarek fell. Nonatha.
Fell.
And the hatch slammed shut. On its own. A wind burst down the hallway, scattering chalk and paper. The lights flickered in sequence, from attic to stairs to kitchen, then died completely. The silence that followed was flat. Not heavy. Not threatening. Empty. Owen stepped forward and touched the floorboards. Then smiled, this time like a real child. He forgot us. They stayed one more night. Not because they wanted to, but to be sure. To know if the forgetting had taken hold, or if the echo was merely hiding, waiting to remember again. Layla and Marcus took shifts. No one slept. Owen, for the first time in weeks, did. Curled up on the living room couch, arms around his favorite stuffed animal, breathing deep. His face twitched only once, as if bracing for the echo's return. But it never came.
No tapping. No humming.
No voices at 3:03. Just the wind rustling dry leaves against the porch railing. Just silence. Real silence. And somehow that was the most terrifying sound of all. When morning light cut through the upstairs blinds, Layla walked through the house alone. She stepped softly, inspecting each hallway like a soldier clearing a war zone after the ceasefire. The walls were still, the mirrors untouched. The attic hatch hung sealed above the hall, heavy and inert.
No ticking. No breath.
No presence. It was just a house again. But that word again bothered her. Had it ever been just a house? She made one final trip to the attic. Climbed the ladder slowly, half expecting cold hands to grab her ankles. They didn't. The hatch opened with a familiar creak, but the kind made by wood, not something within it. She climbed up, stood in the dusty space once filled with whispers and movement and watching. Now it felt hollow, but not quite abandoned. More like a forest after fire, quiet, blackened, healing. In the center sat the rocking horse, still, facing the far wall. She approached it, knelt, brushed a layer of dust from the floor and saw a faint imprint beneath. A footprint, small.
Bore.
No deeper than the others, but different. It faced the other way, like someone had turned back, left, voluntarily. Then she noticed the mirror, still shattered, still mounted in its cracked frame. But the largest shard, once fogged with shadow, now reflected her face perfectly. Just her. Not a beat behind. Not mimicking. No smile where there should be none. No eyes that weren't hers. She touched the glass. It was cold, but nothing touched back. Downstairs, Marcus was loading the car. He'd packed only what mattered. Clothes, essentials, and the journal. sealed again in the waxed cloth they'd found it in. They had decided to leave the house behind. Not sell it. Not pass it on. Just abandon it. Let it rot. Starve it. Silence it. We could burn it, Marcus said once, halfway serious. But Owen, standing barefoot on the porch, shook his head. It would scream. They drove away at 10:21 a.m. The sunlight glinted off the upstairs window as they rounded the bend on Barrow Lane. For a moment, Layla thought she saw movement behind the curtain. A shape, small, still, watching. But when she looked again, it was gone. They checked into a temporary rental an hour away. A modern condo, open floor plan.
No attic. No crawlspace.
They painted over the old journal entries in their minds. Stopped using the invented language. Tried to reclaim themselves in their own words again. It was difficult at first. They second-guessed their own reflections. Flinched at sudden sounds. Avoided mirrors for days. But eventually, it passed. Owen started laughing again. He began drawing again, too. Stick figures. Sunshine. Animals.
No attic.
No names. No more warnings. Until one afternoon, Layla flipped through his notebook and found a page she didn't recognize. Not a drawing. Just text. Scrawled in his blocky handwriting. Words she didn't teach him. Not English. Not their made-up language. It said, "He is almost gone. But dust remembers. Even when we forget." Layla looked up at Owen. He was staring into the microwave door. Not his reflection. Just the depth. The suggestion of a shape watching through. And then he smiled. Layla yanked the notebook from Owen's hands. "What is this?" she asked, voice trembling. Owen didn't answer. Not right away. He blinked. Once. Twice. As if waking from a daydream. Then he said very calmly, "It's not me writing those." Layla crouched down. "What do you mean?" He looked into her eyes. "He forgot. Like we wanted. But now he's trying to remember again." They watched him closely after that.
No screens. No mirrors.
No quiet moments alone. Owen didn't seem scared. But he wasn't the same either. He spoke less. He started humming again. The same humming. Old nursery rhymes from nowhere. Tunes that made the lights flicker if the house grew too quiet. Marcus contacted an archivist. Pretended he was doing research on 19th century families in Elmridge. Asked about the Greaves family. After 2 weeks, he received a reply. There was no Margaret Greaves.
No Eliza.
No Greaves family listed in any land records, census data, or graveyard rolls for the region. None. Not a single documented presence. Almost as if they'd been erased. Or more chilling, unwritten. So Marcus looked in older places. Handwritten wills, property ledgers, church records, and in a dusty copy of a burial log from 1874, one name stood out. Greaves, M. Unmarked burial.
No procession.
Burned. No first name. No surviving family. No cause of death. But in the margins, a faded note. House still unsettled. Recommend sealing the upper chamber. Second incident. Prayers ineffective. Layla stared at the scan. Upper chamber. That has to be the attic. And second incident. So Eliza was the second, like we thought. Margaret was the first. Marcus nodded. But what was the first incident? Owen answered from across the room. They let it speak. They hadn't realized he was listening. Or maybe it had been. That night, Marcus sat up in bed, unable to sleep. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Not peaceful, suppressed. Held breath. He opened the journal one last time. And found a fresh page. Crisp. White. Uniged. Only one sentence on it. I remember now. He didn't show Layla. Not yet. She was holding on by threads. But the next morning, when he opened his laptop, the screensaver was gone. Replaced with an open document. Blank. Except for one line in 72-point font. Hello. and below that, pulsing like a live microphone. Listening, he slammed the laptop shut, checked every device. Nothing had internet access. Nothing should have changed. They had locked it all down. Everything. He turned and called, "Owen!" But Owen was already standing behind him. Expression neutral. One hand clutching the edge of his shirt. "Don't say anything," Owen whispered. "Not yet." Layla came into the room moments later. Held up her phone. A voice memo had started recording on its own. Its title read, Echo 1, contained 5 minutes of silence. Except for one soft sound at the end. Tick, tick, tick. They burned the journal, tore it apart, soaked it in gasoline, and watched it curl into black ash in an empty field. They buried the ashes in a lead toolbox beneath 3 feet of concrete and sealed it. But Owen still drew things he'd never seen. Faces from reflections. Words in spirals. Phrases in other voices. They stopped asking questions. They stopped trying to understand. They focused on one thing only, silence. Because somewhere in some forgotten part of memory, behind the drywall, under the attic dust, beneath every whisper you ignore, something still listens. And when it remembers your voice, comes back. Not as a ghost, not as a monster, but as you. The house on Barrow Lane remained empty for nearly a year. Neighbors whispered that it had been condemned. Others claimed a fire had gutted the second floor. One man swore he'd seen a family leave in the middle of the night, their faces pale and hollow, the child humming something that made his dog whimper for hours. Whatever the truth, the house stood silent, until the new man came. He arrived just after Christmas, a stranger with no family and fewer words. His name was Simon Cordell, and he signed the deed without stepping inside. The realtor, a junior associate unfamiliar with the house's reputation, handed him the keys with a half apology. "Some say it's cursed," she joked nervously. Simon only smiled, lips barely moving. Curses don't survive the logical mind. He moved in that same night, alone. Simon was an archivist, not the type who restored old Bibles or curated museum exhibits. He dealt in spatial archives, architectural memory, houses that remembered in ways people did not. He believed places carried trauma like blood in wood grain. So when he read about Barrow Lane through hushed threads and redacted reports, he didn't feel fear. He felt curiosity. And beneath that, something deeper. A pull. The first 3 nights were uneventful.
No voices. No footsteps. No dreams.
Simon walked the halls, ran his hand over the walls, listened through a copper stethoscope he had modified for ambient sound. He recorded everything. Temperature, vibration, pressure shifts. Nothing. Just the groan of old beams and the sigh of drafty corners. Exactly what a century-old home should sound like. Until the 4th night. He was brushing his teeth when the mirror above the sink flickered. Just once. A light ripple, like heat rising off asphalt. He leaned in, waited. Nothing. No second ripple. No breath on the back of his neck. No mimic in the reflection. Still, he took a note. 12:07 a.m. Mirror distortion. Bathroom. 0.5 seconds. Nwing spike. No temp drop. He set down his pen. Then the radio in the living room turned on. Simon didn't own a radio. The sound wasn't static. Not music either. Just shuffling. Like pages being turned. Shoes on old floors. Whispered breaths. He walked slowly down the stairs, recorder in hand. The sound grew louder as he approached the front room. He paused at the threshold. The air was warm. Still, he stepped in. No radio.
No speaker.
No source. The sound stopped. But something had changed. The floorboard beneath the antique rug in the far corner of the room was now cracked. Split just enough to see something wedged beneath. He rolled the rug aside, revealing a recessed square cut into the hardwood. Sealed with iron nails and ringed with old wax, now cracked and brittle. A box. No, not a box. A trunk. Simon retrieved his pry bar and kneeled down. The nails came free with surprising ease, as though softened by time. He pulled the square of wood up, exposing the lid of a small, iron-strapped trunk no wider than a footlocker.
No markings. No dust.
Not even a single cobweb, as if it had been placed there yesterday, or as if something had kept it clean from the inside. He set up 2 cameras, one facing the trunk, one facing himself. Then he opened it. Inside, paper. Hundreds of pages layered like ancient files. But they weren't bound. Each sheet was torn from a larger hole. Ripped pages, uneven and frayed. Some covered in writing, others blank, and a few still wet with ink. Simon reached for the top page. Before his fingers touched it, the paper shifted. Not moved, settled. As if it exhaled. He hesitated. The house creaked. He pulled the first page free. Written in crimson ink, in elegant, cursive script. I was not the first, but I was the one who wrote his name. This trunk is not storage. It is a grave. If you open it fully, he will wake hungry.